The Ghost Convoy. Chapter 1. The Mountain Pass. It was one of those nights where the sky seemed to swallow everything in its path inky black with no stars, no moon, just an endless void that clung to the earth like a suffocating blanket. James J.D. Davidson had been driving for 12 hours straight, his 18-wheeler groaning under the weight of its cargo as it rumbled through the winding, desolate mountain roads of western Colorado. The isolation out here was oppressive, with nothing but jagged cliffs and towering pines to keep him company. But J.D. was used to it. He'd been trucking for years, accustomed to the long, lonely hours on the road. This haul was supposed to be like any other get in, deliver the load, and get out. But as he navigated the sharp turns of the pass, something began to feel off. The air seemed too still, too heavy. Even the radio stations had faded into static, leaving nothing but the hum of his engine and the occasional creak of the trailer behind him. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. He'd be out of the mountains by morning if he could keep his pace. And then it would be smooth sailing down to the city. Just one more stretch, he told himself, as he shifted in his seat and flicked the switch on the CB radio. Breaker, breaker, this is J.D., calling out to any drivers on the west side. Anybody out there? His voice crackled through the speaker, the familiar call offering a strange comfort in the midst of the looming darkness. Silence. J.D. sighed, leaning back in his seat. Not unusual for these parts, this pass was known for being remote, and truckers rarely took it unless they had no other option. But as he turned a corner, his headlights sliced through the night, illuminating a strange sight up ahead. A convoy of trucks, 4 of them crawled along the winding road in front of him. Their taillights blinked dimly, almost as if they were struggling to stay lit. J.D. frowned. He hadn't seen another vehicle for hours, and there was something off about these rigs. They moved too slowly, swerving occasionally as if the drivers were half asleep, or worse. Where the hell did you all come from? J.D. muttered, easing his foot off the gas. The trucks looked old, rusted even, their trailers long and looming, barely visible in the gloom. J.D. clicked the CB again, this time aiming his message directly at them. Hey there, this is J.D. Looks like we're all headed the same way. You boys all right up there? For a moment, the radio stayed quiet. Then, a burst of static hissed through the speaker, followed by a low, garbled voice. It was too faint to make out the words, but something about it sent a chill up J.D.'s spine. Didn't catch that. Say again. More static. And then, a voice distorted. Alien crackled through you. Can't leave. J.D.'s heart skipped a beat. He quickly switched channels, wondering if he'd accidentally tuned into some interference, but the same garbled voice came through. Follow us. He sat back, unease spreading through his chest. Something was very wrong. J.D. checked his rearview mirror, hoping to see another trucker pulling up behind him. Nothing. The darkness stretched endlessly behind him, like a black hole. Chapter 2. The Silent Convoy. J.D. kept his distance from the convoy, the nagging sense of dread growing with each mile. The trucks in front of him continued to weave along the road, their movements unnatural, almost robotic. He strained to get a better look, but the dim light and thick fog that had begun to settle made it impossible to see the drivers' faces. His CB radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer, but no less chilling. Turn back. J.D.'s knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. His instinct screamed at him to hit the brakes, pull over, and wait for this nightmare to pass. But curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, kept him driving. Who are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then the static roared, a screeching sound that made J.D. wince. His eyes darted to the dashboard, where the dials flickered erratically, the truck's engine sputtering as though something was interfering with it. His headlights dimmed for a moment, the darkness around him growing thicker. And that's when he noticed it. The trucks ahead of him weren't making any noise. No engine rumble, no tire squeal, nothing. They moved in total silence, gliding along the road like ghosts. A chill ran down J.D.'s spine. He pressed the brakes lightly, letting his truck slow as he kept a safe distance behind the eerie convoy. He was a rational man, not one to believe in ghost stories, but this was something else. Suddenly, the lead truck jerked sharply to the right, its trailer swinging wide as it careened toward the edge of the road. J.D.'s breath caught in his throat. There was no guardrail here, just a sheer drop into the abyss below. But instead of plunging over the edge, the truck halted, hanging precariously over the cliffside. J.D. slammed on his brakes, his heart pounding in his chest as he brought his rig to a stop. The trucks ahead had also come to a standstill, their taillights blinking weakly in the fog. What the hell? J.D. muttered, reaching for the CB radio again. Is anyone out there? What's going on? The static returned, and then, through the crackling noise, came a voice. It was faint, but this time unmistakable. Run. J.D.'s blood turned to ice. He watched in horror as the lead truck slowly backed away from the cliff, its movements jerky and unnatural. The other trucks remained still, their forms barely visible through the swirling fog. Without thinking, JD shifted his truck into reverse, his heart racing as he tried to put as much distance between himself and the convoy as possible. But as he did, the trucks in front of him began to move again, this time faster, more erratic. "Shit," JD cursed under his breath, slamming his foot down on the accelerator. Chapter 3, Into the Nightmare. JD's rig barreled down the narrow road, the headlights illuminating the endless twists and turns of the mountain pass. His hands were slick with sweat, his pulse thundering in his ears as he desperately tried to escape the phantom convoy. But no matter how fast he drove, the trucks were always there, just ahead, their silent forms cutting through the fog like apparitions. The CB radio crackled again, but this time JD didn't reach for it. He couldn't bear to hear the voices anymore, those eerie, distorted whispers that clawed at his sanity. Then, without warning, the fog lifted. JD blinked, his eyes straining to adjust to the sudden clarity. The road ahead was clear, the trees lining the pass now stark and looming in the moonlight. For a brief moment, he thought he had escaped thought, that whatever had been chasing him was gone. But as his truck roared down the mountain, JD caught sight of something in his rearview mirror. The convoy was behind him now. His heart leapt into his throat. The trucks were gaining on him, their headlights blazing with an unnatural glow. He could see them more clearly now, old, rusted vehicles that looked as though they hadn't been on the road in decades. Their trailers were covered in grime, their bodies dented and scarred. But it was the faces of the drivers that truly terrified JD. They weren't human. Their eyes were hollow, empty sockets that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Their mouths hung open in a silent scream, their skin pale and rotting, as though they had been dead for years. JD's hands trembled on the wheel as he slammed the accelerator to the floor, his truck roaring in protest as it hurtled down the road. The CB radio crackled one last time, and the voice low and guttural spoke again. "You are ours." Chapter 4, The Final Descent. JD's truck raced down the mountain pass, the road twisting and turning beneath him. The convoy was relentless, its ghostly trucks closing in, their headlights growing brighter, their eerie forms looming in his rearview mirror. The mountain pass seemed endless, and JD could feel the weight of something far more sinister closing in on him. He was no longer just running from trucks, he was fleeing from something ancient, something malevolent that had claimed this stretch of road long ago. Then, up ahead, JD saw at the end of the pass. The road widened, leading down into the valley below. If he could just make it to the other side, he might escape this nightmare. But as he barreled toward the exit, the road in front of him began to change. The asphalt cracked and split, dark shadows rising from the ground like tendrils, twisting and writhing as they reached for his truck. JD's heart pounded in his chest. He had no choice, he had to go through it. With a roar, his truck plunged into the darkness, the shadows swallowing him whole. The world around him warped and twisted, the sky turning black, the trees bending and contorting as the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel. The trucks were gone, the convoy vanished, but JD knew that he hadn't truly escaped, he was trapped. Epilogue: The endless road weeks later. A search party found JD's truck abandoned on the side of the road. The cab was empty, the engine cold, and there was no sign of the driver. Locals whispered about the mountain pass, about the old stories of ghostly convoys that roamed the roads at night, luring unsuspecting truckers into their grasps. JD was never seen again, but sometimes, on the darkest of nights, truckers driving through that mountain pass report seeing a lone rig in the distance, its taillights flickering in the fog.